Hello and welcome into the Take the North podcast along with Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune. I am Mark Grote of Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. And what a day, what a weekend, what a week it has been for the Chicago Bears. Dan and I, on this being a Monday, attended the Kevin Warren, Ryan Poles presser today in regards to Matt Eberflus being fired as head coach and what the plan of attack is right now. It was a jam-packed house here out at the Hall. It was filled with everybody. I mentioned the two speakers today. Well, actually, there was three speakers, too. I should not leave out the interim head coach, Thomas Brown. But also today, we did have three McCaskies, Dan. George McCaskey, Pat McCaskey, and Brian McCaskey as we begin to look forward. Dan, welcome in, brother, and your initial takeaways from the day before we get really specific, and a little bit later on in the show, we will play some of the sound from the key subjects of the day.
Grote, takeaway number one. When is the last time that we had a routine Monday at Haugh? I'm serious about that, man. I think it goes back to the day after they beat the Panthers, right? I think this is the last time that we walked into that building on a Monday and things were normal. So that's my first takeaway, because you can feel the weight of all of the strain of this season, and you could see it in the faces of everyone that talked today. That's Ryan, that's Kevin, that's Thomas Brown. My second takeaway is that Kevin Warren has got the controls right now, and we can get into more of this and talk about it more at length. But I think it was very clear that 2025 is going to be the shit or get off the pot year for Kevin Warren, right? A shovel's got to go in the ground somewhere for a stadium. A head coach has to be hired. A general manager who currently right now has the employment secure for the time being has got to guide this franchise forward in a way that creates direction. But I think it was very clear today, watching those two men sit side by side, that Kevin's in the driver's seat and Brian's along for the ride right now, and we'll have to figure out how they kind of sort through this as they get into a very, very critical head coaching search, which both men acknowledged today was going to be pivotal to the organization's future.
Yeah, I mean, part of the proof of that, and we know Kevin Warren is a strong speaker. He's a bit of a salesman, and he's been a huge success in his life because of that. One of the things that he said that struck me early, but then changed, was he did say that Ryan Poles, the general manager, will serve as the point person on the new coach hiring. That sounds good to say. You're the point guard. You're the man. You're the guy who's going to go find us our next coach. But then, and we'll hear this a little bit later on, when Kevin Warren was challenged about who has final say, that's one of the first times I've really heard him stumble, because he didn't answer the question right out of the gate. It took
a follow-up. It took a follow-up.
It took a follow-up, and that was about a minute 30, I think, into the whole thing. And then he just sort of sideswiped it, because he's like, oh, yeah, well, we're going to do this together. And and again, we'll play it for you, but I am paraphrasing right now. He's like, oh, yeah, but, we're going to know because we're going to do this together. But, if there's a final say, Ryan Poles is the GM, but we're going to know. So we're going to do this together. That tells me, and I wish Kevin Warren could have just said it, that he is in charge of this. He will have final say on this. Nobody else is going to have final say on this. And there is no doubt in my mind that Kevin Warren will be making calls as well. He's going to be the point person. He's going to be the final decider. And I'll tell you what, I actually don't have a big problem with Kevin Warren making calls around the NFL.
No.
One of the things that I will assume, Dan, and you know him back in the Minnesota days, I will assume that his network is great. Now, if he thinks that he's going to make the decision himself, like, oh, I think I know should be the coach, it should be so-and-so, then I got a problem with it. But if he really is reaching out to his strong network of guys, then I don't have a problem with it.
So let's go through a couple positives here, and then I'll give you one other observation that I had from today. One of the positives is that because Kevin Warren has been here for the last 19 months, because he's had almost 2 years to kind of understand the fabric of everything that goes on inside of Haugh, the Bears are better equipped to launch this coaching search than they have been the previous few times where they've had to go through coaching searches. Obviously, remember in 2015, they needed the help of Ernie Accorsi. In 2022, they needed the help of Bill Polian. In 2018, Ryan Pace was able to navigate that search with the help of George and Ted. But you have a guy now here who knows the inner workings of Haugh. He knows the weaknesses, he knows the strengths, he knows the working dynamics. And so that should help them. The network should help them. We pined forever as people in the media for the Bears to try something a different way. You remember the famous George McCaskey quotes on there being nothing magical about a so-called football czar. Well, Kevin Warren is going to be your team president. He's going to be your overseer of a process like this to try to get you on the right track earlier than you need. Kevin Warren also mentioned today, Grote, that this isn't just about hiring a head coach. It's about hiring a head coach who can also hire a staff, right? And collectively with the general manager, the team president, and the head coach, the Bears, I think, have great evidence over the last couple of years that they need a better assistant coaching staff. Like that's been pretty clear in the derailing of this team. The last observation I want to give you and get your input on is the fact that this is the first time I ever looked at Ryan Poles in that room and saw a man who seemed exhausted and a little bit embarrassed. Like it was, he was sitting up there without the usual presence and command and confidence that we're used to seeing him express himself with. It's understandable with what they've gone through over the last 6 weeks and more importantly, last 4 days. But there was just a weird vibe and a weird tension in that room because they had to come and explain essentially this oil spill that occurred on Thursday at Ford Field and then Friday when they had to fire Matt Eberflus.
It was like his parent was sitting next to him,
yeah.
Right? It's like when you're 13 or 14 years old and your parents start to become uncool and you don't want them around for everything. And it's like, yep, dad is here and he's taking care of everything because I couldn't handle it. And what I started to think, during the press conference and after it, as much as Matt Eberflus was in over his head when it came to coaching and end of game scenarios, is the blind spot for Ryan Poles his hiring practices. And that's why I don't have a problem with Warren doing his networking to bring in a coach. That it's almost like he was in over his head when it came to the hires that he made and the hires that he allowed. One important thing though from Ryan Poles I thought was really interesting and I liked and I bought is that Poles said that he's learned a lot about what this team needs now, what the core of players, maybe those 8 captains he's referring to. He thinks he has a better idea of what they need in a head coach. He vastly overestimated what Matt Eberflus could do for the personalities on that team and what each and every single player needs on that team. And again, I do find it a little bit ironic because of how much they talk about getting to know the people on their teams. And I don't know that Ryan Poles had a really good handle on what kind of people were on this team, what they desired, what they needed. And hopefully that is a legitimate learning curve for Ryan Poles and it will help him in the next hiring.
So let's hear a little bit of audio from some of these guys. Where do you want to start, Grote? Who do you think makes the most sense to start with today?
You know what? Actually, since we were just talking about it, and let's hear it in Ryan Poles' words on exactly what he's learned from the subsequently bad hiring of Matt Eberflus.
I've learned a lot over the last few years. I think the most critical thing is I know from the roster that we have right now exactly what this team needs because of the core group that we have here. Before that wasn't really the case of understanding who was going to be here. It was a really tough situation to walk into. So knowing exactly the core of our team and what traits are going to help get that team to be a championship caliber roster.
Yeah. So you hear it there, and there's conviction in his voice. And look, like the one thing that struck me today is Ryan talked about trying to find a head coach who can blend a young quarterback with an experienced group of veterans around him. And clearly they miscalculated how to do that. What bothered me walking out of Haugh on Monday, Grote, was the idea that they had this gift that was given to them by the Carolina Panthers and the #1 overall pick, and it turned into Caleb Williams. And then ultimately they mismanaged the hell out of the first 12 months of Caleb Williams's career. And it, look, like they think Caleb is strong enough to be able to work through that and get past it. But man, oh man, is there a lot of lost time, lost resources, lost everything because of the way this went down.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And just to take you behind the curtain on a podcast we're doing here right now, for some reason I'm not hearing the audio, but we will.
You heard it before. You don't need to hear it twice.
I have heard it before. No, you're right about that. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to play one of our favorite new games here on the Take the North podcast, and that is Dan Wiederer. Are you pleased? And that will be in relation to a question that you asked of Ryan Poles about gathering candidates here. Might it be difficult to gather the peak coaching candidates to Chicago? I left the question on it for Dan's sake. And then, Dan, after you hear this from Ryan Poles, I'd like to know if you are pleased. Here it is.
In the upcoming search, how will you address apprehension from candidates who are worried about having a mismatched timeline with you and wondering about your long-term job security before they sign up to come and be part of this organization?
Yeah, I think just spending time with both of us, you'll understand that we prioritize our people that work here, and going through that situation, we can talk through that. We're open to talk through that. And I think if you just ask around in this building and how we treat people, that shouldn't be an issue at all.
No, I'm not pleased. I'm not satisfied with that answer because it didn't help me feel better about their ability to alleviate concerns that exist. I know they exist. I had calls left and right over the weekend, Grote, of people saying, man, like this job is going to be attractive for a lot of reasons, but there's a mismatched timeline with the general manager, and there's a fear that the general manager might not be here 15 months from now. And that's a scary proposition to sign up for if you're a prospective head coach and you're saying, well, what happens if we get off to a bumpy start in my first season trying to get things on the ground? And then the general manager gets fired, and then another general manager who didn't hire me comes in and is overseeing me without the same belief in me that the person that hired me had. And so Kevin's presence will be important to that. Ryan says they can talk through it when those issues come up in the interviews or at least the preliminary vetting process. But that's an obstacle. It's one of the obstacles the Bears will have to deal with as they go forward through this search. Now, look, like Kevin Warren documented what he finds very appealing about this job. The fans and the tradition, throw those out the window. I don't need to hear those. That's pandering. But he talked about cap space. He talked about draft capital. He talked about the quarterback in Caleb Williams. He talked about the depth of this roster. He talked about even the stadium project that's coming, which I think would probably excite a candidate or two to know that you could be the coach that is here when that building opens. You would hope that this next coach they hire is the one that coaches the first game in the new stadium for everyone's sake and every project they've got going on. But those are some of the things the Bears are going to sell when they get this search off the ground. They're going to have to do some selling here. We've talked about it before, Grote, that this isn't a draft. The Bears don't get to pick who their head coach is. Their head coach gets to pick them too. And so they're going to have to do some recruiting and some selling and show someone why they would 100% want to come and take this job and work under this umbrella of power, right? Like, I mean, that's going to be a thing that some people are going to ask questions about and try to get the right answers for.
What it makes me wonder now, Dan, like thinking about it again, we'll go to a place that we kind of went on after the game, and we brought it up on the possibility, at the time, could both Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles be going? I don't think it's off the table that at the end of the year, it is Ryan Poles' job. And I know what Kevin Warren said today. He said that he supported him. He's our general manager. I love this guy. He's great. But I don't understand why Kevin Warren would get up there and say what he said without saying it fully, that he's in charge of this coaching search. And he sort of, like we said earlier, kind of said that Ryan Poles will have final say. But if you're not giving power to your GM, why not just fire? And I hate saying that because I like Ryan Poles. I think Ryan Poles should still be here. Why not just fire? Why not clean the slate, bring in another GM if you're going to be half-assed about the role that your general manager has in hiring the next head coach who one would assume would be answering to the general manager, but apparently that's not the case. And so now we have another, screwed up pecking order for the Bears if that's what it's going to be. Who's the coach answering to at this point?
This is the problem too, Grote, because we spent the month of January last year wondering whether the mismatched timeline with Matt Eberflus and the new quarterback was going to be a problem. And Ryan Poles consistently emphasized it's not going to be an issue. It's not going to be an issue. Matt's back. Matt's going to lead us where we want to go. We made all this progress, blah, 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 blah. And then we're 12 games into Caleb Williams' rookie year. And the fear that was on the front burner for people just, 11 months ago, 10 months ago, 9 months ago is reality that they had to fire a coach that everyone said, why didn't you just get rid of him when you had the chance to? Because then you could have had a matching timeline with the new head coach and the quarterback. So you're setting yourself up for another mismatched timeline. It's what they do at Haugh. They perfect that, and so some way, shape, or form, we'll go that route. I'm going to give you two other things that have been on my brain a little bit. Number one, the Take the North podcast right now is establishing through executive Take the North powers in order that the word culture cannot be spoken, cannot be discussed, cannot be elaborated on until there is a 9 in the win column under the Bears' standings. Whenever that day may be, it's got to be 9 or higher for you to start talking to me about how much you appreciate your culture and how good your culture is and how great the locker room is and how everybody's pulling in the same direction. Heard it too many times. I've heard it way too many damn times, and it just ends up hollow and it ends up false. And the Bears are headed possibly, Grote, here for a 13-loss season. Like, we can't rule that out. And so your culture the last 3 years would have gotten you 14 losses, 10 losses, and 13 losses. Phenomenal culture that they praised on. I don't want to hear it. The next time someone in leadership at Haugh can say the word culture is when there's a 9 in the win column.
Amen to that. I will see you on your culture word and raise you the word communication. Stop telling us how well you communicate when all that has broken down this year is communication. I mean, Ryan Poles told us today that, after a long pause about Shane Waldron, that, there were some communication issues. And they talk so much about how well they communicate, but communication has been something that has broken down. So they can't just be, it's funny, like they're not getting away with throwing around the usual football cliche words because they're breaking the rules that go into all of them. All right, another thing we need to tackle here, Dan, is the question, one of the main questions that we needed the answer to, and that was on why Matt Eberflus was doing a press conference on Friday at 9 a.m. as he always would, and that he was fired a few hours later. The answer that we were given is that the decision was still being made, that they don't take this stuff lightly, that they weren't going to make a fast decision on Thanksgiving Day. The fact that it was Thanksgiving was brought up as well, but they still allowed him to talk right there. Now, Kevin Warren did say a couple of times that it could have been handled better. What did you think about the answer that they gave to that?
Yeah, I did appreciate Kevin acknowledging that there was probably some missteps in that, and that he raised his hand and said, "I'll be the first to say that we could have done that a little bit more smoothly." Again, by the time the sun rose on Saturday, I was kind of beyond that because I felt like that was going to be a one-day story that created a lot of waves, but ultimately kind of overshadowed what actually happened, which was the first season firing of a coach in Chicago Bears history. Look, like that was 9 uncomfortable minutes for Matt Eberflus, for sure. No question. And the Bears had about 100 different options on how to make that kind of go a little bit easier. I also do understand the layers to the process of firing a coach, right? Like, it's not just he comes in and you do you're fired and you walk him out to his car. Like, you have to sound these things through. As Kevin Warren said, there's a process of discussion within the room with George McCaskey, with Ryan Poles, with Kevin Warren. George at some point has to present the proposal to the board of directors, and they've got to say, okay, understand what you're doing, here, go right ahead on it. So there are layers and there are procedures to the whole thing. It was definitely clumsy. But in the context of the 2024 Bears, it will be a small footnote that the Bears will own. They'll move on. They're going to have to explain that to a candidate or two, because that is going to come up in the interview process on when somebody's going to go, by the way, you got any questions for us? Yeah, I do have one. What the hell happened with the last guy where you had him start on his prep for the 49ers, and then pulled the plug on his computer before he was done doing the Zoom call. So yeah, I mean, they owned it, and they'll move on, and hopefully things will be a little bit smoother from there.
Yeah, I think the only coach and or GM that I remember speaking after getting fired, even though Flus was not fired, so this is a little bit off of that, was Phil Emery. Didn't Phil Emery, the general manager who was fired, he and Mark Trestman, after 2 years, they get canned, and he goes up there and reads a statement and then says, "Go Bears," right?
He gave a statement and walked out. Yeah, and he didn't take questions. It was very odd. It was many firings ago, so it's vague in the back of the recesses of my mind, but that definitely occurred. Yeah, I mean, these are wild times, Grote, and that's why I say, like, when is the last time we had a routine week? And like, just be normal, Chicago Bears, for like 1 week. Just be normal.
Absolutely. There is, of course, and there should be, concern for Caleb Williams, and it was brought up today in question in terms of the fact that it is possible, very possible, in my opinion, that Caleb Williams will be on his third play caller once next season begins, unless Thomas Brown is hired as head coach, or if Thomas Brown is somehow kept on as offensive coordinator. But I do believe I have this cut. It was Ryan Poles talking about that very issue, and can Caleb handle all that is going on?
I think we've seen his growth through some of the situations we've had so far. We always got to keep that in mind. And we're going to make sure, again, when we go back to what's best for the Bears, his development is critical. So we need to make sure that there's alignment in that space so he can continue to get better.
Right, we know that
Will he have input?
I don't know about specific input, but it's got to be a major part of an interview process, is making sure that there's a plan for a young quarterback in this league.
Grote, I'm interested to see where that takes us. I do want to get back in my dusty archive files and find out, recall really, like, what the level of involvement of Mitch Trubisky and Justin Fields were in their respective after year one hiring process of a new coach. I know both were given the chance, I believe, to meet with the coach at some point. I don't remember. Yeah, again, I'll have to do my research on that and compare it up and marry it up with what is on tap for Caleb Williams. But you do hear Ryan there say that, look, like, they're going to be seeking somebody that has a plan for a young quarterback. I'm going to give you some of the other adjectives or boxes that the Bears want checked in a new coach. They said extremely high standards, tough, bright, demanding, attention to detail, can create an environment of accountability, creative, intelligent, a decisive decision maker, and somebody that sets extreme and demanding standards. So those are your boxes. If you know anybody, get your resumes ready, send a direct message through LinkedIn to 1920 Football Drive, and maybe you can be considered for this next job at Haugh.
I got $75 right here that says that's artificial intelligence putting together those. I mean, come on. I mean, look, I'm not ripping them. Of course, those are great requirements for a head coach, but I'm not looking at that and going, "Oh, interesting. Oh, really? Oh, wow." I mean, that is what you should have when you hire a head football coach. Duh.
Little behind the curtain look here. Courtney Cronin has wrestled away the responsibilities in the media room of dividing up the transcripts of press conference. That used to be Larry Mayer's job. He has been basically ousted from power by Courtney. Courtney, I was going through the list today as she took control of transcriptions from today's session, and I was like, extremely high standards, check. Tough, check. Demanding, check. Attention to detail, check. And can create an environment of accountability, check. Courtney Cronin might need to be between Cliff Kingsbury and Todd Monken on your list of potential Bears coaching candidates.
That's hilarious, man. I while we're talking too about those things, like, hey, look at Thomas Brown up there. It feels like he fits some of those spots. Again, I'm not predicting that he's going to get the gig, but right after the thing, as long as we're talking about our fellow reporters, Deion Miller was sitting right behind me, and she's just shaking her head, and she's like, how could in the world did they not? How does he not get the job over Shane Waldron?
Yeah.
And I want to keep an open mind, and I'll root for that guy, but it just doesn't seem, again, if they're doing this search with the AI requirements, it's really difficult for me to think that a smart move would be to have a guy that has so little experience.
Well, listen, I've always also referred to Matt Eberflus as the AI coach because it always felt like he was just regurgitating things that AI would tell you to say as a coach. Tough times don't last. Tough people do, hustle, intensity, take the ball away, whatever it is, right? And they hired Matt Eberflus over Dan Quinn in the hiring cycle, and if you've spent 4 minutes with Dan Quinn, you understand the dynamic personality he has and the charisma he has to galvanize a room. And so look, like this is going to be part of the hiring process. I'll write about it at some point about how the forward-facing presence of this job matters. Thomas Brown is showing you a little bit of what that needs to look like. There's a lot more to the job, obviously, and he's got more questions to answer. But we heard from him again today, and always entertaining to hear from him. I'm not sure what, if any, audio you have from Thomas, but we can have a little discussion about kind of his first impressions on his first day convening a meeting with players at Haugh.
Yeah, no Thomas Brown audio right now, but he is definitely, as we pretty much knew, he will continue to call the plays. Obviously, that takes him out of the booth. He'll be on the field. It should also be pointed out that the new offensive coordinator now in title will be wide receivers coach Chris Beatty. He gets promoted from that spot. So he, on an interim basis, that's where he is. And if you didn't figure it out already, Eric Washington will be the man that will be calling the defensive plays, which makes a lot of sense since he is the defensive coordinator. But what else did you derive from Thomas Brown today?
Since 4 weeks ago, Chris Beatty is now the third Bears employee to hold the title of offensive coordinator.
Wow. And we will speak to him, by the way, on Thursday when the coordinator speaks. So it's going to be another eventful day on Thursday, as if tomorrow and Wednesday won't be.
There were some messages from Thomas Brown that he spoke with players about and then relayed to us. Number one, obviously, there was some cliche stuff about being accountable, dependable, and available, about being aggressive and violent. But he did talk about keeping family business as family business and said, like, I've got some really nice neighbors, but they don't need to know what's going on in my house because it's none of their business. My first reaction to that is a couple of weeks ago, we had Matt Eberflus talking about the tough times that might happen at your church. And now Thomas Brown's talking about what's happening inside his house. I'm wondering what the parishioners of Matt Eberflus's church and what Thomas Brown's neighbors think of this Bears season, because they might have seen some things. But I think you had a coach saying, like, guys, like, this has been a little bit too loose lippy this year, right? And there's been too many people talking to too many people, and we need to keep some of that in-house and come up with solutions. And so that seems to get like it's going to be a hallmark of the next 5 weeks. We'll kind of see how it plays out. And I just thought he was pretty firm and not really giving Caleb Williams any forgiveness in the idea of like, hey, yeah, look, we know we've turned your rookie season upside down. We don't have time for that. Like his message about Caleb Williams kind of getting into a positive headspace was like, deal with it. This is what it is, and we can't change it. And to spend any time worrying or lamenting what this has become is going to waste time and energy. And you've just got to figure out a way to power through this struggle, as difficult and unfair as it might be.
Yeah, and I think the locker room is going to be interesting. And my message to whoever the head coach is, and now it's Thomas Brown, be competent, and the players won't talk about you.
100%.
You had a completely incompetent head coach. It probably blew their minds, these players, how incompetent Matt Eberflus was. And you also and maybe even part of the incompetency is that he's got 8 captains in there, all of them with different personalities, all of them empowered. Don't empower these players and then be like, oh, keep your business to yourself, and be competent. So that's a good message to Thomas Brown as well. And for whatever it's worth, he did say today that he is, and I didn't expect a different answer because it's too late in the game, but he is keeping the 8 captains in place as they are.
Maybe the first misstep that Thomas Brown has made since he was promoted to offensive coordinator and then head coach came today when he said that when he was informed by Ryan and Kevin on Friday that he was going to be replacing Matt Eberflus and becoming the Bears interim head coach, that his first question back was, do I have any weekend obligations? I've got a flight to catch at 4:00 to go home and see my family and kids. It kind of took me aback there. It was like, man, like that might not be the first question I would ask in that given moment. And Thomas said that he obviously wanted to reconnect with his family and got back on Sunday. But you talk about the challenge that's ahead over these 35 days, right? Like the ones, trying to lead this team through the finish line of this season with this schedule, with this emotional baggage that they've been carrying, with a locker room that, in his words, and I wanted to get your take on this before we get out of here, is just, he brought up the word division, and he talked about one of his primary goals being to unify the locker room. And that was a pretty I guess, attention-grabbing revelation that he has sensed some significant division within this team.
Do you think that division was, though, the division against Matt Eberflus, or do you think that there is something that we're not even aware of, that there's players in that locker room that are not getting along?
Yeah, I can't close the door on that. I certainly can't close the door on that with the way things have gone and look. Like, we both know that losing brings out the worst in a lot of teams and a lot of people. And this has been a losing streak that has been intense with the way the losses have come. So I understand why people are a little bit on edge and emotional at this stage of the game. But it seems like Thomas Brown's mission is to try to get that turned around as soon as possible, right? And point it in the right direction.
I thought one thing that was funny that he said too, because, and it was not even intended to be funny, but it was hilarious to me, that one of the last things he said was, "I'll let you guys know about the injuries on Wednesday."
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a game. I'll let you know that Mercedes Lewis is having a Veterans Day off on Wednesday.
Well, don't forget that the second year, first round, top 10 pick right tackle got hurt Thursday in Detroit. You know?
Yeah, he did.
Is Darnell Wright going to be play again this season? There's a lot to sift through, and that's the thing. Right? Like, that's my point. Like, there's not just 2 games to go in the season. There's 5. You know, and like, you are on the precipice of colossal embarrassment if you're not able to get it together quickly. That's going to be the challenge for Thomas Brown this week.
Hey, man, Dan and I are just getting going on this week's episode. Stay tuned. We thank you all for listening and watching and being with us in big numbers this year. We appreciate the comments, the likes, the subscribing, and all that stuff is beneficial to you if you like the content that we are bringing you from Haugh Hall. Dan and I will be at Haugh Hall every day this week except for Tuesday, which is, I don't think anything's going to happen on Tuesday, but who knows? Actually, I should tell people we are doing a Take the North live. We're going to be live with Take the North. Is that Tuesday night? I believe 6 until 7. Is that right, Dan?
Correct.
Studs?
That's correct. Yeah.
So we will be live on Tuesday. Take the North. So we're looking very forward to that and what other developments occur and what our sources are telling us. And we will bring that to you on Tuesday in a live edition. And then it'll be up and running on the website as well. And you can get the podcast wherever you want it. Tell a friend about it as well. So that is all for today. For Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune, for Adam Studzinski, the executive producer of the Take the North podcast, I am Mark Grote saying thank you for listening and watching the Take the North podcast.
Great talk. See you out there.